for those of you who don't know me, I am Aimee. I am a small group leader, a life group leader at church, and I taught the retreat last year, and this is something that for me is a literal passion. Like if I could do this all day, every day, this is what I would do. Like there's nothing I enjoy more than sitting around with women and talking about God. And that sounds super godly, and I promise you it's not. It's just the way he wired me. It's fun for me. So, throughout this weekend, if I teach something that you don't understand, or you want to understand better, or you're just not sure about and you want to challenge it, I am always open to those conversations. I am not precious about it. I don't get everything right. I don't want you to just take my word for it. I'm going to give you a lot of different Bible verses. You don't have to look them up while we're doing this, but I really recommend that you write them down, just the reference, and go back and look at them later. And look at them for yourself and talk to God and say, you know, was she right about that? You know, just don't take my word for it. That's all I'm saying. I am a walking, talking example of the prodigal son. For those of you who know that parable, I was raised in a Christian home and I was very blessed and very loved, and the world just always held an attraction for me. And so in my late teens, I walked away from God for several years, actually, and gave my parents many gray hairs. The only reason I tell you that, you are going to hear different parts of my testimony this morning. I'm not going to tell you everything, but again, really happy to talk about it. I'm free of all of that stuff now. But what I want you to know is that when I tell you that God showed me something, like he had to work. I did not accept him at face value at all. I challenged him for years. So when I say that God showed me this, or I'm sure of this, or this has been proven in my life, like I mean it. My faith is hard won. It was not an automatic. It was not something that came easy for me.
May I just verify that
this is my mother, for those of you who don't know.
Is her and the general rule?
If you'd like testimony to my rebellion, she's here.
No, I just meant the characteristic. She was a person that always did question things.
Everything.
So.
From everyone.
Yeah.
Doesn't always go down.
That was not anything for that, honey.
It wasn't, no, it's fine. It was, yeah, what she's saying is it wasn't just God. I really did question everybody. And I grew up in a culture that does not, I grew up in New Zealand, where they're all about dragging down the tall poppies. They do not believe in people blowing their own trumpets, or, like, everybody is very self-deprecating, very reserved. It's very much, you just go ahead with what you're doing. You don't broadcast it. And I was a person, so I would walk up to president of the college and be like, "Are you sure about that? Like it just doesn't." I was taught by my dad to critically think and to question everything and don't take man's word for anything. And I took that to heart. And yeah, anyway, I did it with God too. So our theme this weekend is simplify. And when I went to God about how do I teach on this, because he knows that because of the journey I've been through with him, my passion is about intimacy with God. My passion is about God, literally fulfilling the things in you that you've always wanted and never found. And I'm like, simplify, how does that work? And what he says to me is simplifying is about clarity of the mind. It's about understanding the truth and how to think, like literally developing a mind that thinks clearly and understands what's real and what's not. So with that in mind, when I went to him about how do we do that, there's 3 things that I'm going to endeavor to prove to you this weekend. The first is that the reason life is confusing and more painful than it has to be, I don't want to say painful in general, more painful than it has to be, is because we don't trust God's guidance and we don't take his advice. The second is that we often believe that God is either hiding himself or information or his plan from us. And that puts resistance between us. It's a lie, but we believe it. We think God is being mysterious And so we don't follow his path because we think we can't find it. And then the last is that when we follow God's advice, often we believe it's going to create a lot of conflict or a lot of problems for us, or just be boring. So one of the things that I'm going to hopefully show you today is that life is actually better and simpler and more satisfying when we follow God's way, even if it causes conflict. Because obviously, you know it does. We're not free of that. You'll never hear me pretend that life isn't complicated. We all know that. We all experience it. Being here and spending this weekend talking about simplifying, it's not about pretending that life's easy. What I'm going to try and do is explain to you why it's complicated and that it doesn't have to be as complicated as it is. The thing that makes life so complicated is confusion, right? We don't know what to do. We have information, we have philosophies, we have all kinds of things coming at us all the time. Conflicting advice, conflicting experts. It makes it difficult to make decisions, and that creates doubt and fear in us. There's a verse in the Bible, 1 Corinthians 14:33, if you want to write this down and look at it for yourself later. For God is not the author of confusion, but of peace. I think it's really important. Everything that I bring to you, I'm going to try and bring it back to the Word, because what I want you to see is that God addresses these things. The reason He's given us His Bible is because He's showing us what the truth is. Confusion does not come from God. That's the takeaway there. God is not the author of confusion. If you are in a position where you are feeling confused, that is not coming from God. He does not want you in that place.
Maybe what's that reference again to?
1 Corinthians 14:33. So what creates confusion for us? There's a lot of different things. We have desires that conflict with God's. So we might know that God wants us to act or be a certain way, and we don't want to do it. So we get a little bit muddy about, you know, when and how should I do that. Sometimes, even if we think God's way is good, we have the disapproval of other people telling us that that's not how to do something. Or right now, I mean, in our culture, we have a great deal of resistance to biblical ways of thinking. We know that, and we've all experienced, that we can make a decision now that seems simple, and we can find out later it has huge impacts that we did not anticipate. And when we have that experience a few times, it can kind of freeze us in fear sometimes, like what's going to come out of this if I do this or if I don't do that. We can get caught up in the fear of uncertainty about the future. Sometimes we really do struggle to know what the best option is. Sometimes it's really hard to know what would be the right thing to do here. But the other side of that is sometimes we know what the right thing is, but we don't want to do it. And so we look for an alternative that we think is okay. You know, it's not bad. If I don't want to do that, how could I do this in a way that isn't bad? We also, as human beings, there's a lot of circumstances outside of our control. And one of the things that's hardest, I think, in my relationship with God, He knows what's coming, and He knows what's going to happen, and sure, He's got all the power in the world, but I can walk through my day and just be slammed with something that had nothing to do with me. I didn't make a choice, I didn't do anything wrong, but I get thrown into something painful or something difficult for no reason other than that's life, right? And I've battled with God about that a lot. But I want you to know, I believe the biggest reason for confusion in this world and for complexity is because we have an enemy who is active and intelligent and doing everything he can all day, every day, to try and keep you in the dark. It's all he wants to do. Keep you in the dark. Destroy your life if he can, but gosh, he's going to make it sound really hard to figure out what the right thing is to do here. The good news is we have a God who not only gives us a lot of promises about giving us clarity, but gave us a written word that we can use and refer to find out the answers to the questions that we have. So the reason life is confusing and more painful than it has to be is because we don't trust God's written word and his spirit to guide us. That's what it comes down to for all of us. I don't care how intimate you are with God. When life gets scary and painful and confusing, you are afraid God's not going to come through, or he's not going to come through in the way that you want him to. I'm afraid God's not going to come through. That's all of us live in that place. I grew up as the daughter of a pastor and a missionary. I knew all the right answers. I was saved at 11 years old. You could have talked to me when I was 15 and you would have been like, wow, like she's got her stuff together. Absolutely not. I was ill-disciplined. I always had an attraction to the world, like I said. I've just battled the whole time. And to me, God's perfection made him seem like he must be emotionless and boring. Because the people that I knew who lived good lives, they were always the ones destroying the fun. Oh, you shouldn't do that. Oh, that's not a good idea. What are you thinking? You should be ashamed of yourself. And that was what I had in my mind as aligned with perfection. Perfection was the person who set all the rules and followed them to the letter. And that's not a fun person to be around, right? So I thought that's what God was like. And I also thought that the only real emotion that he had was either anger or disappointment because I was always screwing up. So sure, he was going to save me. I knew that the heaven thing was real, but I thought it was basically his way of proving that he was a good guy. Look at how useless you are. I'm going to let you go to heaven anyway. Like I thought that's basically where we stood. As an adult, to my mother's credit, my parents gave very good advice and very godly advice. I was not lacking for wisdom around me, but I just refused to listen to it for a variety of reasons that I'm sure we've all been through. As an adult, once I had freedom from the restraint of my parents, I started giving in to all those indulgences that I had always wanted to and been sort of held back from to a certain degree. In my early 20s, I was diagnosed by my doctor with alcoholism. I did not believe that that was true because I could point to people and say, well, they drink way more than I do. So, clearly I'm not. Clearly I don't have a problem here. I used to lie about everything, and I was in a lot of debt. My life was chaos. It was true chaos when I look back now. It was a constant fumbling and stumbling. Misery, actually. And the stupid thing is, I actually knew what the right thing was to do in most situations. I had been raised with biblical wisdom. God had given me discernment as a spiritual gift. My friends would all come to me for advice because I could nail the question all the time. And then I would walk away and never take the advice that I could hand out to everybody else like candy. My life just went wrong on every level. It just did. And I became, I was very hurt. I had been hurt. There were things that came into my life that were not my fault, that I had been wounded by. I was very angry that I lived in this constant state of inner conflict because I knew what was right and I didn't want to follow it. And I thought God was a mean guy who had created me to be rebellious and then was punishing me for living to the character that he had given me. I thought, you jerk, you could have made me somebody who wants to do the right thing, and you didn't. So it's your fault that I'm like this, and then you're getting mad at me for it. That was basically where I thought he and I stood. And I was literally depressed because of that. I didn't have a desire in those years to do good. I just wanted to feel good. So my choices were always driven by what's going to give me a thrill or a bit of fun or make me feel good about myself. And usually, honestly, I was wrong. Usually I would make the choice and then regret it later. But in the moment, that was my basic decision making, was what's going to feel the best for me. I can deal with the consequences later. And I would say, my mantra basically was, God, why are you doing this to me? I would make these awful decisions, and I would put myself in terrible situations, and terrible things would happen. And I would say, God, why are you doing this to me? And that sounds ridiculous, and I kind of laugh about it now, but it was real for me at the time. I was blind to the fact that I was leading myself pushing myself into darkness, and then getting mad when I tripped because I was in the dark. And I thought the reverse was happening. I thought God had pushed me that way, and I was just being true to who I was. And it was his fault, and then he was getting mad at me for it. So I have a husband who hates to read instruction manuals. I don't know if you've ever been around somebody like that. But he'll go like to IKEA or something, get a box full of furniture, bring it home, and refuse to read the instructions, start to put it together, and get so angry. It's not intuitive. That's his line. It's not intuitive. You should just be able to do it. He has a lot of knowledge about this stuff. So to his mind, I should just be able to figure it out. I shouldn't have to read through that 4-page manual to put this, drawers together. And he gets so aggravated about it. And I look at that and I think, that's exactly what I was like with God. He gave me an instruction manual for life. I went, I'm not reading that. That's boring. That's a waste of time. And then when things fall apart, because 5 of the screws that are supposed to be in it aren't there, I'm like, this is your fault. Why did it have to be so hard? It wasn't intuitive. I see that in myself. 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17, if you want to write down the reference. All Scripture is inspired by God and is useful to teach us what is true and to make us realize what is wrong with our lives. It corrects us when we're wrong and teaches us to do what is right. God uses it to prepare and equip his people. Now, if that's true, and that's what you're questioning today, is that true? Because if that's true, then that means God has given me a book that gets me ready in advance of what I need. It prepares and equips, right? So if that's true, I've got all the answers I need. It's actually sitting on my phone today, but sitting in book form in my room, right? But I didn't like the answers. When I would read the Bible, it would either sound really boring, really self-righteous, or really hard. And I would think, if I went and did that, people are going to think I'm nuts. And my life's going to get worse. That was how I thought about his word. I liked the promises that were in the Bible. When I would hear about these wonderful things that apparently God's supposed to bring into your life, love and joy and peace and security, and I think, well, that sounds great, but I don't see it. That was my honest thought process. That sounds wonderful. It's not happening in my life. So I assumed that the reason it wasn't happening in my life was because I was a failure. I'm not doing good, so he's not going to give me good. That's what I thought was going on. And I have to tell you, that's an exhausting way to live. I was so tired all the time back in those days, just absolutely exhausted. There's a chapter that you probably, if you spent any time in the church at all, you've heard about or read. It's Psalm 119, one of the songs that we sang. The verse comes from, or the chorus comes from this verse, which is verse 105. Your word is a lamp to guide my feet and a light for my path. When I would hear that when I was younger, this is, by the way, this is the longest chapter in the Bible, and the entire thing is a meditation on the joy and wonder of God's word. The whole thing, that's what it's about. If you just kind of skim it, like I used to, it feels like or looks like you're thinking, well, this is godly people saying godly things. These are guys who are like, God's wonderful. The word is wonderful. You're all great. This is great. Give me more of your word. And I'm thinking, I can't relate to that. I don't want more of God's word. I was jealous of people who seemed to live and think that way, because I thought, man, life must be so easy for them, because they naturally want to do what's right. That's what I thought. God made them so they naturally are drawn to his way. Gosh, it would be good to feel, I'd love to wake up in the morning and feel like that. And I was so angry and so jealous of these people. So my perception was that if you're really faithful to God, it's because you either haven't struggled in your life, like your life's been pretty easy, so it's pretty easy to go along with what he says, or you just naturally have a heart that points in the right direction. God made you with that kind of character. But I want to tell you, in this, and there's way more that I'm going to show you, but in Psalm 119, which I used to think was godly men saying godly things. There's also these verses. I weep with sorrow. Encourage me by your word. Keep me from lying to myself. Give me the privilege of knowing your instructions. Evil people try to drag me into sin, but I am firmly anchored in your instructions. Arrogant people smear me with lies, but in truth I obey your commandments with all my heart. Protect me from those who hunt me down without cause. They almost finished me off, but I refused to abandon your commandments. In your unfailing love, spare my life, then I can continue to obey your laws. If your instruction hadn't sustained me with joy, I would have died in my misery. Pretty uplifting stuff, right? These are not people who wrote this, who've just been like breezing through life, going, things are great and God's awesome. These are people who faced evil, who faced terrible feelings, who faced struggle, who've recognized that God's word led them in the right direction, and they are applauding him for that. They're saying these awful things happen, but when I stick with you, I can do it. With your help, with your strength, with your instruction, I can do this. I don't believe that anybody who wrote this naturally wanted God more than I did. I think they had just learned the truth. They had realized that God had something worthwhile to say, and they were applying it to their lives and seeing the benefit of it. On the other hand, I didn't want to hear God's truth. I wanted to choose my own way. Part of being the kind of person who questions everything is you don't actually trust anybody. And that leaves you in a place where wherever your strength is, that's as strong as it's going to get. If you can't take instruction from somebody else, then you are literally living and dying by your own strengths and weaknesses. Because if you don't know you're blind to something, nobody can speak into it. If you don't know you're weak in something, nobody can strengthen you in it. If you only ever listen to yourself, then you are the best your life can get. And for me, because that was how I lived, that led me, in 2004 I was diagnosed with clinical depression, which my doctor and my counselor at the time both believed I'd probably suffered since I was about 13 years old. And in 2005, I was 28 years old, and I had reached such a point of misery that I woke up one day, and I'd come to this spot. I wanted to die. Like, I literally was begging God to kill me. The reason I was begging God to do it was because I was too scared to commit suicide. I thought I'll probably mess that up too, and then I'll just be in this terrible life stuck, having hurt myself or messed myself up. I did not have the courage to hurt myself, at least not in a dramatic way like that. But I was very self-destructive in my decisions, usually around alcohol. And so I woke up one morning, and I remember literally thinking, I can't do this anymore. Like, I had reached the bottom, and it was so hard to get out of bed that day that I mean, you know, you sit there, I don't know if any of you have ever been through this, but you literally sit there running through the excuses in your head of how I could get out of fulfilling any kind of responsibility today. And I was so far beyond that point that getting physically moving felt impossible. And I rolled over in bed. Alan, because my husband is one of those early to risers, like bounces out of bed in the morning, singing in the shower, and you know, the whole bit. And I'm laying in bed staring at the ceiling, and all I can think is, I can't do this anymore. I literally can't do this anymore. And I did. I thought about killing myself, and I thought, I can't do that either. And so I thought, I'm at the end. Like, what am I left with? And I was so disturbed and so far gone that I just was robotic. I got Alan off to work. I got dinner going in the crock pot, and I literally like walked to the middle of my living room and I just stood there. I had nothing left at all. And I sat there and I went, kill me. Like, I asked him to do it. And I could tell that he wasn't going to. And I was so angry. So I was like, this is what you've brought me to. Like, this is where I am. How can you do this to me? Like, just still thinking that way. But I tell you what happened that day. I got so angry with God for breaking me, because that was how I thought it had happened, that I put aside this assumption that I had, always had, that I needed to be good for God. That when I went to him and talked to him, I needed to speak like the gentle lamb, humble daughter, thankful servant, that I needed to demonstrate to him the right attitude that I thought he wanted, because that was why he would give me what I wanted. I threw that out the window. And subconsciously, I think I was tempting God to smite me. Like, I really thought, if I do this right, he'll get so mad, he'll like strike me down, and it's a win-win, right? So I did. I railed at God. I swore at him. I blamed him for things. I screamed at him. I started laying out for him every single thing that had ever happened in my life that was on his shoulders. You did this. You brought this person. You made that happen. You let me go there. You didn't protect me from that. Blah, blah, blah. Now, half of it was actually my choice, but I really genuinely felt that he had set me up for this, and so I laid it all at him. And I thought that his response to that would be anger. I thought he would be disapproving of me. He might teach me something out of it, but I was just done. I couldn't pretend anymore. I wasn't making any promises. I wasn't trying to negotiate, because normally I'd be like, well, you know, if you do this, then I'll do this, and we'll get there. I really will. I'll do it this time. You know, none of that. I said, I'm done. I've got nothing. I literally said that to God. I have nothing. I have no energy. I have no emotion. I have nothing left to give you. I cannot provide anything to you. And you have put me in this place, and you are telling me that you're not going to let me leave. What do I do? Like, there was no bones about it, right? And I can't even explain to you I was stunned, silent, that his response to me saying, you're a jerk, and I said it in words that I will not repeat, you're a jerk and this is your fault. And his response to me was to pull me into a hug, like an emotional, you know that feeling you get when somebody who really loves you pulls you in, and you're just like, oh, I can rest here. It was that feeling. He gave me an emotional feeling of comfort. I'm here, and it's going to be okay. And I was like, wait, what? Not only did I expect him to be disapproving, I'd never really experienced an emotional relationship with God. I'd seen cool things happen at different times and been excited about that. There have been times in my life when I'd given him a little more than others, and I'd seen him do some work. I believed he was there. But I'd always said, I need people in my life because God can't give me a hug. I literally had said that to people. How can you have an emotional relationship with an invisible God? Because he can't walk over and put his arm around me. Guess what? The reason we love those interactions with people is because of how they make us feel. If the wrong person comes up and embraces you, you're like, ugh. You don't want that. It's not the hug that helps. It's the feeling you get from the relationship you have with the person who gave it to you. And what God showed me that day was he has that relationship with me. He's here. He's inside. And he can make me feel ways that no one else can make me feel. He wants to make me feel. And that just blew my mind. I'm like, my emotions are terrible. They're completely unreliable. They drive me in directions that are unhealthy for me. And God's like, but my emotions don't. his emotions are perfect. He gives love, he gives mercy, he gives compassion, he's excited with you, he cries with you. What he did with me in that day was the equivalent, inwardly, of the friend who wept with me about the pain that I'd experienced, put their arms around me to give me a sense of security, and said, we're gonna get through this, I'm here. I had that emotional journey with God in the course of like 3 hours, and it absolutely changed my world. So I'm sitting there going, okay, this is not going the way I thought it would, but this is good. So what now?